The Batavia, 1629. In the year 1629, the Dutch East India Company launched one of its finest ships, the Batavia. She was a grand vessel, brimming with cargo, silver, and goods bound for the riches of the East Indies. On board were over 300 people, sailors, merchants, soldiers, women, and children. They sailed with dreams of wealth and new beginnings. But the sea, as it always does, had other plans. Far from home, a storm rolled across the Indian Ocean. The Betavia fought against towering waves, her timbers groaning under the strain. Then came the sharp crack of wood splitting against coral. The ship struck hard upon a reef off the desolate coast of Western Australia. Chaos erupted. Sailors screamed. Women clutched their children, and bodies were flung into the black water as the hull tore apart beneath them. When dawn broke, the survivors found themselves scattered across barren islands, surrounded by endless sea. There was no fresh water, no food to sustain them. Their commander, Francisco Pelsaer, promised he would sail a small boat to Java to bring help. Hope glimmered faintly as he and a handful of men departed, leaving the others behind. But what followed was not salvation. It was a descent into madness. Among the stranded was Jeronimus Cornelis, a cunning apothecary with a dark ambition. With no authority present, he seized power. At first he spoke of order, of rationing supplies, of maintaining discipline. But his words quickly curdled into something sinister, convinced desperate men to join him, and soon he ruled through fear and bloodshed. Those he deemed a threat were quietly murdered. Women were claimed by force. Sailors who resisted were dragged into the sea and drowned, their screams carried away by the wind. Children starved, and the sand of the island was stained red. The survivors, once united by hope, were now divided between the killers and the hunted, yet not everyone surrendered to despair. On a nearby island, a small band of soldiers led by Weeb Hayes stood against Cornelis. With no weapons but stones, sticks, and crude spears, they prepared to defend themselves. When Cornelis and his men attacked, the two groups clashed on the barren shore. The sound of shouting and the clash of makeshift arms echoing over the waves. The fight dragged on until at last sails appeared on the horizon. Pelsaert had returned with a rescue ship. But instead of salvation, the sight of the vessel sparked a final, desperate battle. Cornelis tried to seize the rescue ship for himself. Hayes and his men fought him back with every ounce of strength they had left. When the smoke cleared, Cornelis was captured. His followers were executed on the sand. The survivors, what remained of them, were finally carried away from that cursed place, but they were never the same. They left behind the bones of the slain, scattered across the reef, a silent warning to all who might come after. The wreck of the Batavia still rests beneath the waves off Australia. Though centuries have passed, its story remains a haunting reminder. The sea may be merciless, but sometimes the greatest horrors are born not from storms or reefs, but from the cruelty of man. Story 2. The Sea Venture 1609. In the summer of 1609, a fleet of 9 English ships left England, bound for the struggling colony of Jamestown in Virginia. Among them was the flagship, the Sea Venture, carrying the new governor, Sir Thomas Gates, and hundreds of hopeful colonists. They set sail across the Atlantic, chasing a dream of new lands and fresh beginnings. For weeks the voyage was steady, the great ships carving through the endless blue. But in late July, a storm rose in the Atlantic. Not just a storm, this was a hurricane, a monstrous wall of wind and water that swallowed the fleet whole. The Sea Venture fought to stay afloat. Waves the size of mountains crashed over the decks. The sails shredded like paper. Lightning lit the night sky as men clung to rigging, praying with trembling lips. The ship began to break apart under the strain. Water poured into the hold faster than the crew could pump it out. For 3 days and nights, they battled the storm. And still the sea gave no mercy. On the 4th day, with the ship about to sink, Captain Christopher Newport spotted land, a jagged outline of green amid the raging sea. With no other choice, he ordered the ship driven ashore. The Sea Venture struck the reefs of Bermuda and came to rest, battered but intact. Against all odds, every soul on board survived. At first, the island seemed a paradise. Bermuda's forests provided wood, its shores provided fish, and wild pigs roamed freely for food. But soon, tensions flared. Some of the colonists began to whisper that this island, rich and unclaimed, might serve them better than Jamestown, which was known only for death and famine. Mutiny simmered beneath the surface. Governor Gates held firm. Over the next 9 months, he and his men worked tirelessly, cutting timber and crafting 2 new vessels from the wreck of the Sea Venture. They named them the Deliverance and the Patience. Last. In 1610, the survivors set sail once more, reaching Jamestown with supplies and reinforcements just in time to prevent the starving colony from collapse. The story of the Sea Venture became legend, inspiring tales of shipwreck, survival, and strange new islands. Even William Shakespeare, hearing of the wreck, wove its echoes into his play, The Tempest. And so, from the jaws of disaster, the survivors of the Sea Venture carried not only hope to a dying colony, but a story that would endure for centuries. Story 3. The Vasa, 16-8. In the bustling harbor of Stockholm, Sweden, the year 1628 marked the birth of a dream. The mighty warship Vasa stood tall above the waterline, her hull painted in brilliant colors. Her decks lined with towering cannons, her stern carved with gilded figures of kings, gods, and warriors. She was to be the pride of the Swedish Navy, a symbol of King Gustavus Adolphus's power across Europe. Crowds gathered to watch as the Vasa prepared for her maiden voyage. Families lined the docks, merchants and sailors cheered, and dignitaries toasted to her success. On August 10th, with banners flying and guns at the ready, the great ship slipped into the harbor and began her first journey. The sails unfurled, catching the wind. The cannons thundered a salute, sending smoke across the water. The Vasa glided proudly into the channel. For a few hundred meters, then suddenly the ship lurched. A gust of wind caught her sails, and the proud warship heeled sharply to one side. Water poured through her open gun ports. The crowd gasped in disbelief. Sailors scrambled to right her, but it was too late. The weight of her guns pulled her lower, deeper, until the sea swallowed her whole. In moments, the Vasa was gone. More than 30 men and women drowned as horrified spectators looked on. A ship that had taken years to build, that had cost a fortune, that was meant to lead a navy sank less than a mile from shore, on her very first voyage. The disaster was an embarrassment for the king, though no one dared blame him. In truth, it had been his demands, more guns, taller decks, greater grandeur, that had made the ship dangerously unstable. The Vasa was a masterpiece of art, but a failure of design. For centuries, the ship lay hidden beneath the waters of Stockholm Harbor. Her story faded into myth. But in 1961, divers raised her from the deep. Astonishingly, the cold waters had preserved her timbers. Today, she stands restored in a great museum, a ghost from the 17th century. Her carvings still vivid, her presence still commanding. The Vasa never fired a shot in war. She never conquered seas or claimed victory. Instead, she became something far more enduring, a warning. That pride unchecked can sink even the mightiest of ships before they ever leave safe harbor. Story 4. Batavia's Mutiny, Aftermath Deep Dive. Although the Batavia's wreck and Cornelish's reign of terror are well known, the aftermath of the ordeal was just as gripping. When the rescue ship arrived, it was not merely a matter of hauling survivors to safety. The island itself bore silent witness to unimaginable horrors. Cornelis, the apothecary turned tyrant, was captured after his soldiers' valiant resistance. He had led dozens of men into murder, theft, and manipulation, leaving the survivors physically intact but forever scarred by terror. On board the rescue ship, the remaining crew and soldiers executed justice. Cornelis and his loyal followers were hanged, their bodies a warning to anyone tempted by power amidst chaos. Yet the trauma lingered. Families who had lost parents, siblings, and children returned to the Netherlands and the East Indies, carrying stories of cruelty that rivaled any sea battle. The Betavia had been a ship of promise, a vessel of trade and ambition. Instead, it became a floating prison of human depravity, a grim reminder that the ocean's greatest dangers are not always storms or reefs, but the hearts of men. Even today, divers exploring the Batavia's wreckage encounter relics of both luxury and tragedy. Ornate silverware beside rusted muskets, elegant carvings, beside rotting timbers. Each artifact tells the story of a dream-turned-nightmare of ambition, greed, survival, and vengeance. The Batavia's name has endured not for its cargo or its voyage, but for the unforgettable story of human darkness unleashed at sea. Story 5. The Mayflower 1620. In 1620, a small creaking ship named the Mayflower departed England, bound for a new world across an endless ocean. Aboard were the pilgrims' families, seeking freedom, a chance to practice their faith without fear of persecution. Life at sea was harsh. Below decks, wooden benches replaced beds, and the air was thick with the smell of sweat, unwashed bodies, and the sea itself. Storms lashed the hull, waves crashed over the decks, and many fell ill from cramped quarters and spoiled provisions. Yet the pilgrims endured, driven by hope and faith, praying together as the horizons stretched endlessly before them. After more than 2 months at sea, the Mayflower finally sighted land, the tip of what would become Cape Cod. But the new world was not welcoming. The winter was bitter, the land harsh, and supplies limited. Many fell ill, and nearly half of the passengers perished during the first months. Still, through hardship and despair, the pilgrims persevered. They forged alliances with the indigenous people, learned to hunt and cultivate the land, and celebrated their first harvest with a feast that would later be remembered as the first Thanksgiving. The story of the Mayflower is not just a tale of a ship, but of endurance, faith, and the human spirit's will to survive. It reminds us that the sea is only the first challenge. True survival comes when we step onto unknown shores, carrying only courage and hope. Story 6. Nuestra Senora de Atocha, 1622. The year was 1622, and the Spanish treasure fleet was sailing the Caribbean, laden with gold, silver, and precious gems from the Americas. Among them was the Nuestra Senora de Atocha, a galleon rumored to be one of the richest ships ever built. But the Caribbean Sea is as dangerous as it is beautiful. A hurricane struck the fleet near the Florida Keys, scattering ships and sinking many beneath merciless waves. The Atocha sank, taking with her treasures that would remain lost for centuries. Hundreds of sailors and passengers drowned, their bodies swallowed by the unforgiving ocean. Stories of the ship's riches became legend. Treasure hunters scoured maps and old records, but the sea kept its secret. It wasn't until 1985 that the ship was finally discovered by Mel Fisher and his crew. After decades of searching, the Atocha yielded silver coins, emeralds, gold bars, and artifacts preserved by the mud of the seafloor. The tale of the Atocha is a reminder of both the sea's fury and its generosity. For centuries, the ocean guarded the ship, concealing its treasures, its human stories, and the ghosts of those who never returned home. Story 7. Le Griffon, 1679. In 1679, the French explorer Robert Cavelier, Sieur de la Salle, built a ship unlike any other on the Great Lakes. Le Griffon, a majestic vessel. She was designed to sail inland waters, carrying furs and supplies deep into the North American frontier. The crew numbered just over 30 men, their hearts full of ambition and the thrill of exploration. They sailed along Lake Erie, then into uncharted waters, mapping rivers and trading with indigenous communities. Everything went as planned until the ship entered Lake Michigan, where the weather grew treacherous. A violent storm descended, the kind sailors dread but cannot avoid. The waves towered over the small vessel, the wind tearing at the sails and snapping ropes like twigs. When the storm passed, Le Griffon was gone. Some claimed they saw her disappear into the mist, swallowed by the lake itself. Others whispered that betrayal and mutiny had doomed her. The disappearance of Le Griffon became one of North America's oldest maritime mysteries. Treasure hunters and historians have searched for her for centuries, but no definitive trace has ever been found. The ship vanished, along with her crew, leaving only the wind-whipped waves and a legend of ambition lost to the lake. Story 8. HMS Revenge, 1590s-1600s. The HMS Revenge was no ordinary ship. Captained by the fearless Sir Richard Grenville, she was a symbol of England's naval power. During a time of conflict with Spain, but in 1591, during a mission in the Azores, the Revenge faced a Spanish fleet far superior in number and firepower. Grenville and his crew, just over 300 men, were outmatched, yet they refused to surrender. For 14 hours, the Revenge fought, her cannons blazing, her deck awash with blood and smoke. Sailors clung to the rigging, loading muskets and firing grape shot into the enemy ships, their courage unmatched even in the face of certain death. Eventually, the ship was overwhelmed. Grenville, wounded multiple times, went down with his vessel, but the fight was legendary. Revenge had inflicted significant damage on the enemy fleet, and her crew's bravery became a story told across England for generations. The ship sank, but the legacy of courage and defiance lived on, a testament to what men at sea could endure when faced with impossible odds. Story 9. The Widow Galley 1717. The Widow Galley began her life as a slave ship, transporting human lives across the Atlantic under brutal conditions. But in 1717, she was captured by the infamous pirate Black Sam Bellamy, who transformed her into one of the most feared pirate vessels of the Caribbean. Her decks were crowded with men seeking fortune through plunder, her hold filled with treasures stolen from merchant ships. Bellamy, charismatic and ruthless, commanded loyalty through promises of wealth and freedom. Yet the sea has a way of humbling even the boldest pirate. In a violent storm off Cape Cod, the Widow was caught in a furious gale. Waves battered her hull, winds tore her sails apart, and the pirate crew struggled to maintain control. Within hours, the ship capsized and sank, taking Bellamy and nearly all his men with her. Only a few survived, clinging to debris until they were rescued. Centuries later, the wreck of the Widow was discovered. It's the first authenticated pirate ship from the New World. Its treasures, muskets, and cannonballs are preserved in museums, silent reminders of greed, daring, and the unforgiving power of the sea. The legend of Bellamy and his ship lives on, a tale of ambition crushed by nature itself. Story 10. HMS Dartmouth 1690. In 1690, the HMS Dartmouth sailed as part of England's Royal Navy, patrolling the waters near Ireland during a time of fierce naval conflicts with France. She was a frigate, sturdy and fast, manned by seasoned sailors accustomed to danger. Yet no amount of experience could prepare them for the disaster that awaited. While on patrol near Tory Island, the Dartmouth engaged a superior French vessel. The battle was chaotic, with cannon fire tearing through the rigging, smoke choking the decks, and sailors scrambling to reload and aim under the deafening roar of artillery. Despite their bravery, the Dartmouth was outgunned. Hull after hull was torn open by enemy fire, water rushing below decks, sweeping men off their feet. Captain and crew fought desperately, trying to defend their ship, but one by one, they succumbed to the relentless bombardment. In the end, the Dartmouth was destroyed, sinking beneath the cold waters of the Atlantic. Nearly all her crew perished, leaving only fragments of wood in memory. For centuries, she has been remembered not for victory or glory, but for the bravery of her men facing impossible odds against the sea and a determined enemy. Story 11. HMS Wager, 1741. The year was 1741. The HMS Wager was part of a British squadron sent to harass Spanish interests along the South American coast. Her mission was ambitious, but the ocean had plans that no commander could foresee. The ship wrecked off the desolate coast of Chile during a violent storm. Timber splintered, sails ripped, and the waves tossed the crew onto a rocky shore. Stranded, hungry, and with bitter winds cutting through their clothes, the survivors faced a new challenge: survival. Weeks passed, and tension grew. Food was scarce, and disputes erupted among officers and sailors. Mutiny and betrayal became as dangerous as hunger. Some attempted to escape along the treacherous coast. Others fell ill and perished, their bodies swallowed by the sand or sea. Eventually, a few survivors made it to safety, recounting stories of cannibalism, desperation, and courage. The Wager's wreck became a legend of endurance and human fragility, a grim reminder that a ship can be lost to the waves. But the mind and spirit of its crew are tested even further by isolation and fear. Story 12. Leusden, 1738. The Dutch slave ship Leusden set sail in 1738. Carrying hundreds of enslaved Africans across the Atlantic, their lives reduced to cargo in the hold. The journey was brutal from the start, the stench of fear, sweat, and disease suffocating in the ship's dark corridors. Disaster struck when the ship ran aground in the Moroni River. Panic swept the decks. But the crew acted with horrifying calculation. Locked in the hold, the enslaved Africans had no chance. Hundreds perished, their screams lost to the river, leaving the crew largely unscathed. The tragedy of the Loystand stands as one of the darkest chapters of maritime history. Unlike storms or shipwrecks, this disaster was born of cruelty and calculation, a stark reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers at sea come not from nature, but from human hands. Story 13. The Grosvenor, 1782. In 1782, the British East Indiaman Grosvenor set sail from England, bound for India with cargo, passengers, and the promise of profit. She was a grand ship, designed to endure long voyages across treacherous waters. But the sea, as always, had its own plans. The coast of South Africa, the Grosvenor ran aground on a hidden reef. The ship tore open, throwing men, women, and children into violent waves. Many drowned immediately, their cries swallowed by the ocean. Those who survived clung to the jagged rocks, battered and exhausted with no fresh water or food in sight. The survivors faced unimaginable hardship. Some tried to trek along the dangerous coastline, only to fall to exhaustion, exposure, or wild animals. Disputes and desperation fractured the group, and slowly life ebbed away. A few managed to make it to safety months later, but the majority perished, their bodies left to the merciless land and sea. The story of the Grosvenor is remembered not for the ship's wealth, but for the endurance, courage, and suffering of those who tried to survive. It is a stark reminder that even the mightiest ships can be broken by hidden reefs, and that survival depends as much on human will as it does on luck. Story 14. HMS Victory, 1744. Long before Admiral Nelson made his famous mark, there was another HMS Victory, a warship of the Royal Navy lost in 1744. She was a formidable vessel, carrying more than 1,000 men into battle, her decks lined with cannons, and her sails catching the wind like the wings of a giant bird. While crossing the English Channel, the Victory encountered a fierce storm. Waves towered over her decks, tearing away rigging and smashing timbers. Water poured into the ship faster than the pumps could manage, and men struggled to keep her afloat. Despite the sailors' desperate efforts, the Victory succumbed to the storm. She sank with nearly all hands, vanishing beneath the cold, dark waters. Families waited in vain for news, and the loss of so many lives was a national tragedy. The Victory's story lives on as a reminder that even the strongest, most advanced ships can be undone by the relentless power of the sea. Courage and skill can only do so much when nature decides the outcome. Story 15. The Hermione Mutiny, 1797. In 1797, the Spanish frigate Hermione became the scene of one of the bloodiest mutinies in naval history. The crew, angry at brutal officers and intolerable conditions, seized control of the ship while it was anchored off the coast of Puerto Rico. In a night of horror, the mutineers murdered several officers, tossing their bodies overboard. The ship was handed to the British, who took possession of a vessel that had been loyal to Spain for years. The mutiny sparked an intense pursuit. Spanish authorities hunted the crew across the Caribbean, bringing many to justice. The story of the Hermione became a legend of violence, desperation, and rebellion on the high seas. It showed that even the disciplined structure of a naval vessel could collapse under cruelty, fear, and rage, and that the sea, while indifferent, amplifies the consequences of human actions. Story 16. The Peggy of Castletown, 1789. In 1789, along the rugged shores of the Isle of Man, a small schooner named Peggy of Castletown sailed the Irish Sea. She was modest in size, but vital for trade, carrying goods, livestock, and passengers between ports. Her crew were experienced sailors, used to the temperamental waters and sudden storms of the region. One fateful day, a dense fog rolled in, thick and blinding. The crew struggled to navigate the rocky coastline, waves crashing over the sides as fear gripped every man aboard. Visibility dropped to almost nothing, and the ship scraped along hidden rocks, tearing her hull. The Peggy began to take on water rapidly. The sailors fought with pumps and buckets, bailing desperately, but the tide was relentless. The vessel slowly sank closer to the shore, and the crew had no choice but to abandon ship. Some swam to rocky outcrops, others clung to floating debris, and by dawn, only a handful had survived. Despite her small size, the Peggy of Castletown's story endured as a warning that coastal waters, with their hidden rocks and treacherous currents, could be just as deadly as the vast ocean. For generations, her wreck became part of local lore, a reminder of the fragility of life at sea and the bravery of those who risked it. Story 17, HMS Bounty, 1789. Few ships have a story as famous as the HMS Bounty. She departed England for Tahiti on a mission to collect breadfruit plants and transport them to the Caribbean. Captain William Bligh led the voyage with strict discipline, while the crew, 47 men strong, were expected to endure the hardships of the long journey. After months at sea, the crew finally reached Tahiti. Life on the island was easier than the strict routine aboard the ship, and tensions between Bligh and the men grew. Fletcher Christian, the ship's master's mate, began plotting in secret. In April 1789, while the Bounty lay anchored, Christian led a mutiny. Bligh and 18 loyal crew members were set adrift in a small open boat, while the mutineers took control of the ship. Bligh's journey was legendary. He navigated over 3,600 nautical miles in that tiny boat, crossing open ocean with minimal supplies and remarkable skill, eventually reaching safety. Meanwhile, Christian and his followers sailed the Bounty to remote islands in the South Pacific, attempting to evade the long arm of British justice. The story of the Bounty is one of rebellion, endurance, and the extremes of human determination. It shows how a ship, though built of wood and canvas, can become the stage for drama, loyalty, and betrayal, shaping history far beyond its physical voyage. The Lutine, 1799. The HMS Lutine was a British frigate, tasked with transporting a fortune in gold and silver from England to Germany. Her hold was heavy with coins, bullion, and treasures, guarded fiercely against theft. But the North Sea, notorious for storms and fog, proved merciless. In 1799, a fierce storm struck. Waves lashed her decks, and the rigging groaned under the force of the wind. Sailors struggled to control the ship, but the Lutine could not withstand nature's fury. She struck sandbanks and rocks along the Dutch coast, sinking swiftly. Nearly all aboard perished, and the treasure was lost to the depths. The wreck of the Lutine became legendary. Its Belle was salvaged and still hangs at Lloyd's of London, a reminder of maritime risk and the perils of transporting wealth across treacherous seas. The story of the ship is remembered not only for lost treasure, but for the lives swallowed by ambition, duty, and the unforgiving power of the ocean. Story 19. The Essex, 1820. In 1820, the American whaling ship Essex set sail from Nantucket, bound for the rich hunting grounds of the Pacific Ocean. Captain George Pollard, Jr. led a crew of 20 men, all seasoned sailors, eager for the promise of wealth that whale oil could bring. Months passed uneventfully, and the crew hunted whales, filling the ship's hold with oil. Then, deep in the Pacific, they encountered a massive sperm whale, larger than any they had seen before. The whale charged the Essex, ramming the ship with a force that splintered the hull and sent men tumbling into the sea. The Essex began to sink. The crew scrambled into small whaleboats, adrift in the open ocean with limited supplies. Weeks turned into a desperate fight for survival. Food ran out, storms battered the boats, and the sun scorched their skin. Some men perished from exposure, others from starvation. In the darkest hours, the survivors were forced to make impossible decisions, turning to cannibalism to stay alive. After nearly 3 months, a few men were rescued, their bodies broken, their minds haunted by the ordeal. And serving as a grim reminder of nature's power, the unpredictability of the sea, and the fragile limits of human endurance. Story 20. The Medusa, 1816. In 1816, the French frigate Medusa set sail for Senegal, carrying passengers and supplies. The ship was poorly commanded, with inexperienced officers and an undertrained crew. Soon the Medusa ran aground off the coast of Mauritania, striking sandbanks that rendered her immobile. With panic spreading across the decks, the officers hastily launched a makeshift raft to carry 147 passengers. The remainder of the crew abandoned the ship in lifeboats, leaving those on the raft adrift in the open sea. For days, the men clung to the raft, exposed to the sun, with no food, no water, and no hope. Starvation, dehydration, and madness took hold. Some men perished instantly, others succumbed slowly to despair. In the most harrowing moments, survivors resorted to cannibalism to stave off death. By the time rescuers arrived, only 15 remained alive. The disaster of the Medusa shocked France and the world, becoming a symbol of incompetence, suffering, and human endurance in extremis. This famous painting, The Raft of the Medusa, immortalized the tragedy, a haunting testament to human vulnerability in the face of the sea and the consequences of misjudgment and hubris. Story 2, 1 La Concorde, 1670s. In the late 1670s, the French merchant ship La Concorde plied the Caribbean waters, carrying sugar, rum, and silver from the colonies back to Europe. Her captain, a seasoned mariner named Jacques Leclerc, navigated the reefs and currents with skill, but the Caribbean was rife with pirates and storms alike. One fateful night, under a new moon, a pirate schooner attacked La Concorde. Cannon fire lit the darkness, and the merchant ship's crew fought desperately. Amid the chaos, the mainmast splintered, sending sails and rigging crashing down. Leclerc was wounded, but he rallied his men. After a fierce struggle, the pirates withdrew, but the damage was done. The ship barely made it to shore, leaking and battered. For weeks, the crew labored to repair her. The story of La Concorde became a tale of courage, resourcefulness, and the razor-thin line between life and death in the Caribbean waters of the 17th century. Dard 22. HMS Endeavor, 1768 to 1771. The HMS Endeavor, commanded by Lieutenant James Cook, set sail in 1768 on a voyage of exploration to the Pacific. The mission: observe the transit of Venus and chart unknown lands. The journey was long and perilous. The crew battled scurvy, navigated treacherous reefs, and endured constant storms. In 1770, while mapping the Great Barrier Reef, the Endeavor struck a hidden coral shelf. The hull groaned, water seeped below decks, and the men scrambled to pump it out. Cook's calm leadership saved the ship. For weeks, the crew worked tirelessly, patching the hull and salvaging supplies. The Endeavor eventually completed her mission, returning to England with maps, specimens, and stories of distant lands. Her voyage became legendary, a symbol of exploration and the human desire to conquer the unknown. Story 23. The Speedwell 1620. The Speedwell was meant to accompany the Mayflower, carrying additional pilgrims to the New World. But shortly after departure from Southampton, the ship began leaking badly. Planks swelled, water poured in, and the pumps could barely keep up. The passengers and crew labored to patch the vessel, but the damage worsened with each wave. After several days, they were forced to turn back. The Speedwell was eventually abandoned. Its passengers consolidated aboard the Mayflower, which alone continued across the Atlantic. Though it never reached its destination, the Speedwell's story highlights the fragility of wooden ships and the constant peril of early transatlantic voyages. Story 24. The Adventure Galley 1696 to 1698. Captain William Kidd, a famed pirate and privateer, commanded the Adventure Galley. She was a formidable vessel, armed with cannons and bristling with ambition. Kidd sought both legitimate prize and personal fortune, sailing the Indian Ocean in search of merchant ships. After months at sea, the crew mutinied over harsh conditions and delayed plunder. Kidd managed to regain control, capturing valuable prizes, but tensions never fully eased. When he returned to England, accusations of piracy led to his arrest and eventual execution. The Adventure Galley became a symbol of both opportunity and treachery on the high seas, where loyalty was fragile and the ocean indifferent. Story 25. La Dauphine 1699. The French vessel La Dauphine set sail from Brest in 1699 to deliver troops and supplies to colonies in the Americas. Early in her voyage, she encountered a violent Atlantic storm. Waves towered over the decks, sweeping sailors overboard, tearing sails to shreds, and flooding the lower holds. The captain and crew worked tirelessly to keep her afloat, battling both nature and exhaustion. After days of relentless struggle, the storm subsided, and La Dauphine limped into port, battered but alive. The tale became one of perseverance and endurance, reminding sailors that the ocean's fury respects neither rank nor skill. The Adventure 26, the Adventure 1739. Not to be confused with Kidd's ship, this British merchant vessel, called the Adventure, sailed the Atlantic during a period of rising tension with French privateers. On one voyage, she was captured near the Caribbean and held hostage by pirates. The crew faced starvation, fear, and the threat of execution. After weeks, a daring escape allowed them to retake the ship under cover of night, navigating treacherous waters back to safety. The story of the Adventure is one of courage, cunning, and the constant presence of danger in the golden age of piracy. Story 27. The Royal George 1782. The Royal George was a British warship, massive and heavily armed, tasked with patrolling home waters during the American Revolutionary War. In 1782, she lay anchored at Spithead when tragedy struck. Without warning, the ship listed to one side. Water poured through open gun ports, and before anyone could react, the Royal George sank almost instantly. Over 800 lives were lost, many trapped below decks. The disaster shocked the nation, becoming a haunting example of how even the largest and most powerful ships could fall victim to misfortune and poor judgment. Story 28. Belle, 1686. French explorer Robert de La Salle's ship, Belle, sailed down the Gulf of Mexico in 1686, carrying supplies for a new colony. She struck hidden sandbars near present-day Texas. The hull was breached, and the crew fought to save cargo and supplies. Despite their efforts, the ship sank in shallow waters. Supplies were salvaged, but La Salle's expedition struggled to survive without their full complement of provisions. Belle's wreck remained buried under mud for centuries, rediscovered in the 1990s, revealing artifacts that told the story of exploration, ambition, and miscalculation. Story 29. HMS Pandora 1790. The British frigate HMS Pandora was sent to capture the mutineers of the Bounty. She sailed across the Pacific, braving storms, uncharted reefs, and the relentless heat of tropical waters. While attempting to navigate the Great Barrier Reef, the Pandora ran aground. The crew fought to save the ship, but she sank, leaving many trapped below decks. Survivors faced weeks adrift in small boats before rescue. The voyage became a cautionary tale about navigation, leadership, and the unforgiving nature of the sea. Story 30. The Royal Charlotte 18-5. The Royal Charlotte was a British merchant ship transporting goods and passengers to India. During the voyage, she encountered a hurricane in the Bay of Bengal. Waves battered her hull, and the crew fought tirelessly to keep her afloat. Despite their efforts, the ship was ultimately lost. Some survivors reached nearby islands, but many perished. The story of the Royal Charlotte reflects the hazards of long-distance trade. During the age of sail, the courage of sailors, and the ocean's indiscriminate power.